Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his mercy endures forever. Welcome back to another episode of Faith Matters with Phillip Campbell. This is a Catholic variety program broadcasting on Good Shepherd Catholic Radio out of our studios here in Jackson, Michigan. And I am the aforementioned Phillip Campbell, your host, your traveling companion for the next half hour. And I'm so pleased you've chosen to spend this time with me here today on another episode of Faith Matters. I had a grandfather once, a grandfather on my mother's side. Never saw him much. He moved to Florida when I was very young. One of my earliest memories is helping my parents move him to Florida. And so I probably only saw him a handful of times in my life. But my parents were keen that I stayed in contact with him. And so basically, I would talk to him on the phone a couple times a year, like holidays and my birthday. I think we went down there to visit him a couple times. Now, growing up, my mother would always say, your grandfather's very philosophical. And when I was young, I never understood what that meant when I was a boy. Like, what does that mean? My grandpa's philosophical. But as I got older, I began to understand, because when I'd have these phone calls with my grandfather, he was always talking about purpose in life, about happiness, about finding value in things, and that sort of stuff. And these sorts of ideas and questions get us closer to the heart of what it means to be a philosophical person or to do philosophy. The German writer Josef Pieper, who I've mentioned before on this program, he wrote that when we do philosophy, we transcend what he called the workaday world. What is the workaday world, and why is it essential to philosophy that we're able to transcend or move beyond the workaday world? Well, the workaday world is the world of usefulness, the world of the working day, characterized by supply and demand, profit, hunger, the satisfaction of hunger, of work, schedules, deadlines, bills, text messages, everything we encounter on a day-to-day basis that makes up the tapestry of our lives. Now you might say, Philip, that's the best definition of everything I've ever heard. How can we get beyond or outside the workaday world when it's basically all there is and all we experience? The workaday world is certainly the foundation of our physical existence, but it's not all that there is. St. Thomas Aquinas has a very interesting quote in which he compares philosophers to poets. Now, what could philosophers and poets possibly have in common? Think about that for a moment. A philosopher, a poet? Well, St. Thomas says, quote, "The reason why the philosopher can be compared to the poet is that both are concerned with wonder." Now, with the introduction of the concept of wonder, we're getting somewhere. Philosophy, like poetry, is born of wonder. The poet who is struck by love writes his verse in a state of ecstatic wonder at his beloved. And the philosopher? The philosopher is in wonder at the marvels of reality itself. It is in the act of wondering, of wonderment, of awe, that we transcend the workaday world. There's a very old story about one of the first Greek philosophers, Thales of Miletus. According to this story, Thales was walking one evening, absorbed in the contemplation of the stars, gazing up at them. He was wondering what they were. Why were they so beautiful? What were they made out of? What was their purpose? And as Thales walked, eyes focused on the sky, mind enraptured in wonder and contemplation at the stars, he stumbled and he fell into a well that was right in front of him. He didn't see it because he was cocking his head upwards looking at the sky. And a nearby maid saw this and laughed at him in derision. Laughed at it. Look at the stupid philosopher, fell in the well. Now, if this story is familiar, you probably recognize it from Aesop's fables. But at any rate, Thales represents the philosopher who's motivated not by utilitarian considerations of supply and demand or profit, but just wonderment. He just wants to know why something is. He's not looking to make any money off of the stars or anything to do with his business. He just wants to know what they are. He's in wonder. Whereas the scoffing maid represents the workaday world, the practical, the down-to-earth person, who not only doesn't understand philosophy, but thinks philosophical reflection is meaningless at best and foolish at worst. Now, if to philosophize is to go beyond the workaday world, then what it means to philosophize becomes not an abstract theoretical question, but something that's really of the utmost relevance to our lives. We increasingly live a life where the demands of the workaday world make constant intrusion upon us. Everything has to be useful. We have these annoying words like multitasking to describe the ceaseless demands of work upon our time. Authentic leisure, well, that's getting more and more difficult to find. Think of all the technology we have, all the technology that's supposed to save us time and make our lives easier, give us more freedom, right? Has my cell phone given me more freedom? No. It's only enabled my boss to call me and text me anytime he wants. Are you more free because of your technology? Time-saving technology, by and large, has not allowed us more time for leisure. It simply showed us more ways to fill our existing time with work. Now, no real philosophy can exist in such a world that is just dominated by work and utility. Now, to go back to Josef Pieper in his essay, he talks about how philosophy stands outside the world of work. The world of work is predominantly about usefulness. It's predominantly about utility and about profit and about figuring out how I'm going to put food in my belly day after day. But philosophy stands outside that because philosophy is a sort of searching after wisdom, not because it's going to make us money, not because it has to do with our daily lives or finding food, but because it answers something deeper about the human person, the desire to know why. Aristotle, in the introduction to the Metaphysics, says, "Men by nature desire to know." The deepest longing of the human person is to know and understand himself and the world he lives in, and that's not something that's subject to the workaday world. And so for that reason, philosophy is always going to stand outside the workaday world. That is, unless the workaday world becomes so all-encompassing that we never have the leisure to have that sort of reflection. This is why in the old days, the study of things like literature and art and music and philosophy and theology were called the liberal arts. Liberal from the Latin word for free. They are free. They are free because they are not beholden to some utility. I'm not learning literature the same way I would learn how to change a spare tire, or that I would learn how to shingle a roof, right? In those cases, I'm learning something for its practical utilitarian value, but when I'm learning literature, I'm learning it to enrich myself, to better understand the world around me, to have a greater appreciation for life. And so the liberal arts are the sorts of studies that have to do with freeing the mind from the shackles of the workaday world. But in order to do that, we need leisure. We need time. That's why another essay of Pieper's, I recommend Leisure, the Base of Culture. He says that culture is not possible without leisure, without having people who have the free time to do things like say, I'm going to go to a concert, I'm going to read literature, I'm going to appreciate art. And all these things, when we read a great work of literature, when we see a beautiful piece of art, when we hear an amazing piece of music, wonder is what happens, an act of wonder, which brings us back to that sort of philosophical insight. Now let's recall the words of St. Thomas Aquinas that the philosopher and the poet both concern themselves with wonder. Now, when we stop thinking merely about how to get the things we need for ourselves and start wondering about the purpose of our lives, well, as soon as we start thinking along that track, we've left the workaday world and we've entered the world of philosophy. This gets back to what it means to be philosophical. To be philosophical is to live a life that is reflective, a life that is examined. The ancient Greeks used to have a temple at a place called Delphi. It was a temple to the god Apollo, who was the god of various things, the sun, wisdom, stuff like that. And the Greeks would go to this temple to seek the words of the god through a prophetess there. And over the door of the temple there was an inscription that said, "Know thyself. Know thyself." This is at the heart of philosophy, to think and reflect about oneself and about the world. God has gifted man with the wonderful gift of reason and the ability to acquire knowledge. And because of this, our first duty as rational people is to make our own selves the objects of our rational reflection. Now, this is why my grandfather was philosophical. He was always reflecting on his life. He was always asking big questions, and he was trying to get myself or anyone else he spoke with to make their own reflections, trying to direct my mind away from the workaday world to contemplate the ultimate meanings behind things. Now, don't get me wrong, the workaday world isn't bad. I know you're saying, "Oh, geez, Philip, I need to go to my job. I need to work. Like, I'm tired at the end of the day. I don't want to sit here and think about philosophy. I just want to have a beer and relax." That's totally fine. The workaday world isn't bad. It's absolutely necessary, but it's not all there is. And to the degree that our culture might seem shallow, perhaps banal, unfulfilling, it's probably because we have forgotten how to go beyond or outside the workaday world into the realm of pure wonder. In fact, as I mentioned before, our culture as a whole seems to suffer to the degree that we forget how to enjoy our leisure time. What do we do in our leisure time? Well, we read things, we go to the cinema, we travel, and we don't travel for work or utility, but just to see something new. Think about places you'd like to travel. Maybe you'd like to travel to Iceland. It's one of my favorite places I'd like to go. Maybe you'd like to go to Peru and hike up and take a selfie in front of Machu Picchu. Maybe you want to travel to India. But why do you want to travel to those places? So you can work over there? No, you want to travel just because you want to see it. When I think of why I want to go to Iceland, it's because I just want to see it. I just want to be there. It doesn't have to do with utility. It has to do with wonder. I want to stand in this place and be wonderment and say, "Whoa, I'm really here. This is awesome." Right? It's a very natural thing to do. It's the reason why we travel, because we're curious. We just want to see something new, and there's nothing beyond that. What else do we do in our leisure time? We listen to music. Perhaps we play or perform music. Perhaps we're involved in drama. We create art. We think about our lives. And, of course, we worship God. Is it any coincidence that the day of the Lord is also the day of rest, the day of leisure? The point is, of all the essential traits of a cultured people, they only emerge when society collectively has enough leisure time for them to. And that doesn't matter whether you're talking about art, whether we're talking about music, whether we're talking about literature, or whether we're talking about religion. We don't do these things because of their utility within the workaday world. Rather, we do them precisely because they help us transcend that world and get in touch with something much deeper, something very intrinsic to the human experience, the world of wonder, the world of meaning. Leisure truly is the basis of culture. Now, the Catholic faith as well is built upon this sense of wonderment. And this is the very wonder of the disciples themselves at seeing Jesus risen from the dead. Imagine that wonderment, seeing a man that had been flogged and crucified and just treated so brutally, put to death in such a horrific manner, and then they see him alive again after 3 days. That is wonder right there. And that is the central reality of the Catholic faith. The resurrection of Christ, that St. Paul says, if you don't believe that, then why do you even believe at all? And it's an act of wonder. The Catholic religion is built on an act of wonderment. This is why the Gloria says that we sing at Mass, we praise you, we bless you, We adore you. We glorify you. We give you thanks for your great glory. Now, here we are about as far away from the workaday world as we can possibly get. We're talking about praise, adoration, glory, things that have no place in the world of mere usefulness. In other words, the ability to go beyond the workaday world is essential to worshiping God Himself, and it's central to the Catholic faith. So this is why, again, I say that this concept is not some dry, abstract, theoretical notion. This is actually central to our ability to worship God, to enter into the depths of what it truly means to be a Christian and rejoice in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is also why it's such a reduction of the Christian faith when the gospel is transformed and shrunk down to merely a social program. When people treat Christianity as if it consists in nothing other than working with the poor, we rob it of its transcendent qualities and make it into little more than social work with a religious veneer. People who do this often don't understand what it means to transcend the workaday world, or why it's important, or it probably doesn't even enter into their mind. They may be incapable of that at the point that they're at in their faith journey. When the focus of our faith and our outreach becomes too enamored with the idea of just meeting people where they're at, but not taking them anywhere else once we meet them, right? Christianity is not about telling someone they are fine where they're at. It is about meeting them where they're at. Definitely, you meet them where they're at. Jesus went out to eat with the sinners. He talked to the prostitutes. But he didn't just say, go on sinning. He said, sin no more, right? So Christianity is not about telling someone they're fine where they're at, but meeting them where they're at, going out to them, meeting them there, but then taking them to meet Jesus, taking them to have a transcendent encounter with Christ, an encounter that takes us beyond ourselves, out of the workaday world. That's what it means to transcend, to go beyond, to go beyond. Now, if we can do this, if we can have a faith that is transcendent, if we can think in this way, think in a reflective way that gets us out of that workaday world mindset, out of that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 mindset, this is what takes us out of the caves of the moment and out into a bigger, broader place. Being able to move out of the workaday world from time to time is what gives our lives meaning and helps us find value in them. And wouldn't you know it, we have a faith that says, yes, we're going to do that 1 out of every 7 days. We're going to call it Sunday. On that day, that's the day where you put down your work, where you give yourself to the worship of God and to leisure. Okay? This is what Sunday's really about. It's not about, work is evil. Work is great. We do it 5 or 6 days a week. But it's about remembering that work is not all that there is, that we have to reflect. We have to give ourselves to God. We have to contemplate the bigger things in life. We have to cultivate our leisure time to better ourselves, to further explore the mysteries of ourself and life and the world, and to give thanks to God and to praise, glorify, and adore Him as we sing in the Gloria. Now, thinking about the church, if our church doesn't help us with that, doesn't help us escape the workaday world, or worse, if it acts like the workaday world is all there is, then we shouldn't be surprised if Catholics continue to leave the church, because we're offering them an experience devoid of transcendence. Now, we've gotten a little far afield, so I want to try to tie this back to philosophy. Catholics of all people should be the most philosophical. The Catholic faith, the hierarchy of truths in our faith, the way that there's all these different teachings, wonderful teachings on so many things that all interconnect and reflect back on the whole and direct all things to God. It's such a marvelous thing that we have at our disposal, being Catholic. It's such a wonderful birthright. We should be the most philosophical of all people, we should have interest in the big questions about life, the contemplation of which draws us beyond ourselves, and outside of our own limitations to contemplate larger truths. So are you a philosophical person? Let's reflect on that. I know it's probably not the sort of thing you ask yourself on a regular basis, but ask yourself now, or do you consider yourself a philosophical person? If you're not, that's okay. Not everybody's going to be philosophical by their nature, but we can all ask philosophical questions from time to time. And if you've never asked yourself any of the big questions, what am I doing in life? What makes me happy? What does God want from me? How can I better myself? How can I find more enjoyment in life? These sorts of questions. If you've never done that, then consider arching your head upwards, contemplating higher things, like Thales of Miletus did. Yes, you're going to say he fell into a well. He did. He did fall into a well. And you might fall into a well now and then. That's okay. You might get laughed at. But you know what? We have our entire lives to get laughed at and fall down, right? That's going to happen anyways. No matter what you do, you're occasionally going to fall down. You're occasionally going to get laughed at. So since that's going to happen anyways, my friends, why not spend some of that time reflecting on the important things, cultivating a philosophical mindset, getting back to that sense of wonderment. Life is so wonderful. Things are so amazing. It's just a wonder to be alive. And I'm not saying that from a sense of Pollyanna, pie in the sky, ignorance of how wicked the world is. I know there's things like terrorism and genocide and bone cancer and all these awful things out there, but it doesn't detract from the fundamental wonderment and awe that the world and the universe should inspire in you. So try to reconnect with that. Try to reconnect. We have our whole lives to fall down and get laughed at. But when your life runs its course, you won't regret that you didn't spend more time working. I can promise you that. You're not going to be on your deathbed going, man, I wish I would have answered more emails. And I wish I would have put in another 10 hours at the office. That's not what you're going to be thinking, I promise. So try to reconnect with that sense of wonderment that is at the heart of our faith, the wonder at Jesus Christ resurrected, and the wonder of the world and the creation, everything that God has made, everything that he has done. Gosh, now I am starting to sound like my grandfather. These are the sort of things he used to try to talk to me on the phone about. And I was like, can I go yet? But I'm starting to sound like him now. So I guess all things come full circle, right? But, okay, well, that's enough to reflect on for now. So thank you for joining me again for another episode of Faith Matters. Until next time, I'm Phillip Campbell. I hope you'll come back again. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. God bless you.